MaximumFun.org.
So, thank you, Jesse. I'm a photographer. I live in Los Angeles. I've been there for about 15 years. I love it. I love Los Angeles. One of my favorite things is really going hiking and then getting a burrito afterwards. It's the best. I work with a lot of nonprofit organizations and a lot of community organizations in LA. Kind of the way that I came to do that work is that I was trying to do commercial work, advertising and editorial, like kind of everybody thinks that they want to do, because that's where the money and the prestige is. But it was weird, like, you know, being in that world, working as a production assistant, as a photo assistant. I just kind of started to question what we were doing, which was basically propping up consumer culture. We would spend so much money on stuff. Like, I worked on this Gucci ad. That the budget was probably $1 million for a one-day shoot, and there was like 75 people working on that thing. It was insane, and I was like, "What are we doing? Like, why are we doing this?" And so I looked around. I tried to find a different way to be in the world as a photographer, and I've been able to do it. I've been able to find, you know, funding for my projects. Been able to be in the world in a way that hopefully is more positive than, you know, the other way that I thought I wanted to do it. So what I'm going to do today is share some of that work. So I've been working kind of in that vein for many years now, and I want to tell you a little bit about some of that work. I'm going to talk about the farm workers work and about some refugee work that I've done recently. I'm also going to talk about photography itself, because I'm an advocate for both people and for photography. I love it. I love photography. So also, if you guys have any questions, any comments at any point, just blurt them out. Like, it's more interesting if it's a conversation rather than me over here just, you know, speaking at you. So this project came about because I was awarded that fellowship from the Alicia Patterson Foundation last year. It's a journalism organization in DC. You know, it was great to get the funding to allow me to work on this project in a focused way over a long period of time. I was really happy. So I wanted to make this work in part because I've actually seen a lot of work about farm workers. There's some amount of work out there about farm workers and you know, that subject. But the thing is, what I noticed was that a lot of times they're depicted as kind of just shapes and fields, not really as people. It's almost an abstraction. Shapes and fields, victims of social injustice, which is true. You know, that is the case. But also, it's just like one aspect of that community's lives, because it is like every other community, a really complex one, yeah? So I wanted to kind of get close to people. I wanted to focus on some of the individuals. So the problems in that community, and I'll tell you exactly which place we're talking about in a second, is they're the same as the problems that exist in almost any other community in the U.S. Any other low-income community, there's inequality in education, inequality in healthcare, contaminated drinking water, substance abuse, violence, all of these things that we know exist in, you know, many places. So I wanted to focus not on that, though. I didn't want to just talk about those problems, because I think that we know that they exist. What I wanted to look at was the people who are actually from the community, in the community, addressing those things. So people who are doing work to alleviate some of these problems. And I wanted to see what I could learn, what we could learn, that we can then take to other communities, whether they're farm workers or not, just any other poor community that needs help. This is the eastern Coachella Valley. The Coachella Valley is actually very close to where we are, in fact. It's 2 hours directly east of downtown LA. If you drive 2 hours east, you get to Palm Springs, right? And once you start going southeast of Palm Springs, there's all these towns. You guys, any of you know this area a little bit? Yeah. So if you start going south or east of Palm Springs, it's just like this series of towns. There's Cathedral City, Rancho Mirage, Indian Wells, all these towns. And like a generalization that you can make about these places is that they get poorer and poorer as you go east. So Palm Springs is a pretty wealthy place. and then you go east, and then you end up in Indio, which is a pretty poor town. And then south of there is the Eastern Coachella Valley, and this is the place that I work in. So the Eastern Coachella Valley is mainly an area of agriculture. So many things are grown there. There's about 30 different crops grown there every year, which is surprising because it's a desert. So, it's kind of weird. Why? And crops are grown there year round. So they grow all of these things: artichokes, onions, potatoes, everything. So many things. And the reason is that they actually have an enormous underground aquifer. Like there's a body of water under the land that's so big that they can't even measure it. Plus, they get water from the Colorado River. So they have plenty of water, and they grow stuff. And so the people who pick, who harvest, who plant this stuff, these are the people that we're talking about. And these crops, they're distributed all over the U.S. from, in stores that range from Costco to Whole Foods. Sometimes from the same field, they just have a different label. So it's like a marketing thing. The main part of this project are these portraits. So I interviewed extensively and photographed probably about 15 people from the community. And I just kind of want to tell you the stories of some of them. This is Maria Aguirre de Bañuelos. So Maria was born in the state of Chihuahua in 1930. And she first came to the U.S. in 1977 to work in the fields. She came with her husband. Maria was in an abusive relationship almost her entire life. Her husband was a terrible person who abused her physically and, emotionally. He's not a good person. And she found this out early in her life. Like when she first got married, she was like, oh my God, this is no good. But she went to her family, and because of tradition, her family demanded that she stay with them. So they were just like, no, that's it. You can't get out. You're married. And that's the way it is. So she continued in this marriage for, another 40 years. And then when she was about 60 years old, she got invited to a meeting. She went to this meeting. This local group of women had a meeting, and they invited her. She went, and at that meeting, a lot of the women spoke about their experience of domestic abuse. And she said that for the first time, she saw herself from outside. Like she had never thought about her experience in a way other than just like living it. So she said that when she did that, she just realized that she didn't have to live with violence. Like she was just, it took that long, but once she was able to see it, she was like, it's as if my eyes were opened. From that point on, she was kind of slowly started to extricate herself from that relationship. And she did. She succeeded in doing it. She became involved with that group, which is called Líderes Campesinas, which means farm worker leaders. And it's an all-women group that now has 7 chapters up and down California. And they teach people, and they provide services like leadership development, education about labor laws, education about sexual harassment, diabetes, and other health issues. So she got herself out of that relationship, and she started working for this organization. She's now in her 80s, and she's still working. And she travels all over the Southwest United States teaching women about their rights. And, I was just like, wow, you are amazing. I've seen her on stage. She's an actress as well. She participates in this plays and theater, which is a way that they use to educate people, farm workers. So I just wanted to read a couple quotes from her. She says that she's happy to be working with people who are, she says, like I was, ignorant of their rights. The many people who come from small towns and villages in Mexico. She says, now I have seen the fruit of the work that the organization has done over the years. I suffered, I learned, and my eyes were opened. I'm not ignorant like I used to be. I realize that I am not important. What is important is that people have the needs that I used to have. So that's her. She's still doing it. She's amazing. I also wanted to tell you guys about, these guys are 3 generations of the same family. The grandfather, his name is Onésimo, and the father is Jerónimo, and the son is Castulo Estrada, and they live in Coachella. Onesimo, the grandfather. He first came here in the 1940s through a program of contracted labor called the Braceros program, which existed for about 20 years. And I asked him why he came. I said, why didn't you just stay in Mexico? Why did you feel like you had to go to another place? And he said, simply, there's just no way to make a living in Mexico. You can't raise a family. You can't move forward. There's just no money. So this was actually a very common answer. I asked so many people the same question, and a lot of them said the same thing. It's really hard to make a living. It's really hard to raise a family. It's really hard to progress. So you go to where you think you can do that. Over the years, after a while, his son, Jerónimo, it's another portrait of him. This guy, this is his son. He started coming here when he was about 18. And he came to the Coachella Valley back and forth every year. And one of the things that, stuck out about his story is that I asked him, what was that like? What was coming here like every year? And he said that he used to walk from the border to the Coachella Valley, which is a distance of about 100 miles, every year. And I said, how many times did you do that? He says, about 7 or 8. Just like smiling, like, it's nothing. So I was just like, oh my God. But it's just like, I think that you just do what you have to do, That's Jerónimo. He's also a very interesting person. All of these people, very sophisticated thinkers. I think maybe I was surprised. I shouldn't have been, but it was fantastic. I learned so much of this experience. Now, the son, Castulo. Castulo is an engineer. He was born in the Coachella Valley. He studied engineering. He left, studied engineering, came back to the valley because he felt that he wanted to make things better in the place that he was from. And I actually met a lot of people who did that. They went away to school somewhere, and then they would come back to their community because they wanted to make things better there. So that was great. So he is an engineer in training for the city of Coachella, but more importantly, he's actually also an elected official. He is on the board of the Coachella Valley Water District, and he's the first Latino, and he's the youngest person on that board. And the reason this is important is because before this, the people on that board were all old white men. It's just the way things developed. And they all have their interests. They're representing their constituencies. So everybody has their interests. But the people of the Eastern Coachella Valley, they didn't have any representation. There was nobody there on that board from them. So when decisions get made about infrastructure, about services to these communities, nobody was there to speak for them. And now he is. This kind of like progressive generational thing that happens because that's the way change is. It's really slow. It's really incremental. But there's about, 13, 14 more of these profiles. And what I've done is I've created this data set about this community that now I think we can, it can be configured into many different platforms and many formats to distribute these stories. So that's kind of where I'm at with it right now. One of the things that I'd like to do is take these materials back into the community in a series of workshops and exhibitions to educate. I also want to share a little bit about this other project. This is the New Americans, and it's a series of photographs, interviews with people who have recently resettled in California from many different parts of the world. So earlier this year, the Annenberg Foundation commissioned me to make this work as a part of their exhibitions and their programming about refugees, which they're doing all summer. And the goal of this work was to tell some of the stories of the people who are arriving here under, seeking asylum. I think that when we hear the word refugees, we kind of picture people in a boat in the water really far away. It's really abstract. It's just like, for the most part, I think that's how we think about it. So we wanted to get close to these people and get their stories and kind of humanize them. All of these people have suffered great personal loss or they've lived under the threat of violence, and they're really happy to be here. And they're looking forward to their lives in the U.S. So I'm going to show you just a couple of these stories. This is Patrick Safari. His name is actually Safari Patrick Kaferefende, and he's from the Democratic Republic of Congo. When he was 16, he lost most of his family in one day, And after that, he went to live in a refugee camp in Nairobi, and he lived in and out of that camp for many years. Now he's now about 28 years old. During that time, he just hustled. He was a roadside barber. He fixed cell phones. He's an artist. He's a very creative person. Eventually, he made his way to the U.S. And one of the things I found out, when people talk about how these new refugees that we're accepting and the dangers of that, one of the things that I found out is that when people come here under asylum, it's such a rigorous process. Like, there are no terrorists getting in, believe me. It's like so many interviews, so many agencies are involved in that process. And he made it. He's here. He lives in Oakland. He arrived in Oakland in July of last year. He works in the kitchen at Whole Foods in downtown Oakland. And he lives in an apartment in East Oakland with other refugees from all different parts of the world. He misses his country and his culture. And he uses technology. This is a suitcase that he brought when he came here. That's all he brought. Like I was saying, he's an artist. He creates these figures that he's trying to sell at craft stores, at craft markets. He misses his country so much. Just the language, the noise, the sound, the air, everything. So he uses technology to stay in touch with people from the DRC. Most of them are also refugees in different parts of the U.S. So he's always on the phone. It's kind of like everybody else. He's in Oakland trying to figure out his life, just like any other young person, trying to figure out what they're going to do, except that he doesn't, he's alone. And, with the help of the IRC, which is one of the agencies that helped to bring him here, he's trying to figure it out, looking for work, looking for a place to live. He has to move, periodically, all of these things. He's a creative young person with a great sadness and a great heart, just like many of you. So he loves music, just life. It's difficult. Sometimes I talk to him on the phone, and, I don't know. It's interesting. This is Zebazira, the father of this family. His name is Zebazira, and Florentine is his daughter. Tito, Solomon Tito is his name. That's the young man right there. And Zebazira is originally also from the DRC. His story is that at the age of 19 years old, he had to leave his small village where he lived because of violence. There was fighting. There's still fighting in the DRC between rebel groups, the government. Everybody's trying to, gain power. So there was violence around him. He had to leave. He ended up in a refugee camp in Uganda, where he lived for 20 years. So before this, he came here in June of last year. Before that, he lived in a refugee camp for 20 years. These kids, they've only ever lived in a refugee camp. He met his wife, had children, divorced, and then eventually when he moved here, they came with him. So everything is new to them, Obviously, they're in a new country, but even just not living in a place like that. He is in San Diego, and the children, are going to school. They're adjusting nicely. But also, he's by himself and just trying to figure everything out. He's very wary by nature. He's like a kind of person that, takes things very slowly. So he told me the story about when he first got here. He got to the airport, got off the plane. There was a couple of people from the Jewish Family Services, which is the organization that was helping them resettle. And he said they picked them up. They took them to this apartment where they now live. And they said, here's some money, and there's a refrigerator. Here's a phone number. Call us if you need something. We'll be back like tomorrow or the next day or something. And he said they left. And he was just sitting there going, oh my God, like now what? Like this is an entirely different reality, So from, so he started kind of exploring. He said, he turned off the lights and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up, the sun was out. He goes, I went over to the blinds and I opened it a little bit. I saw some people getting in their cars, going to work or something. He goes, and I closed them back up. I sat down. He goes, a couple hours later, I walked down the stairs, about 50 feet away from the apartment building, and then back up the stairs. So that's the way he takes things, really slowly. He's really measured in how he does stuff. He's very, I don't know, I think maybe living in a refugee camp for 20 years might cause you to approach things that way. So,
Noah?
yes, sir.
So, how long do you interview these people for, and how do you do the interviews?
So it varies. In this case, I think we were with him and his family for about 3 days. Patrick, we were also with him for about 3 days in Oakland. And then the other family that I'm going to show you, probably the same. But there were some people who we only had like a day. We only had a little bit of time. It was really kind of like this feat of logistics to get this all done in the amount of time that we had to do it, because we were traveling all over California.
So you're just going along with them, and they go about their day, and you talk with them in front of
You
them?
know, so that's kind of the idea, but it doesn't work out that way because obviously you're there, you know, and things are different. So, and also I was working with a small film crew that was capturing some video. So it's very intrusive. Us doing this, you know, is very intrusive. And that was a real tough negotiation at times, you know, just because we have a job. I have to get a story, right? So we tried to be honest, you know. We tried to show something that's representative of their lives and do the best we can.
So you're doing a lot of interviewing as well.
Yeah, I mean, we first, in this case, we would first start with an interview. We just show up, introduce ourselves, sit down, and a lot of times the meals are involved. We go to eat and talk and just kind of start to get the story rolling, even for us to figure out what the story is going to be, like how we're going to. In my case, as a photographer, because I don't have a lot of time for pre-production on a project like this specific one, I shoot a lot. I shoot a lot, and then the story comes together in the edit afterwards. So.
No, you had a similar experience, even when you were making the farm worker pictures. That one of your biggest challenges was, even as a fellow Latino or a fellow Mexican American or someone who knew about farm worker life, just convincing people that
it's true. Even though one of the reasons that I made the farm worker work is because that's how I grew up. My family were migrant farm workers. We moved around every 6 months. So I feel like, it's my community. But it wasn't the people that I knew, like the exact same people that I knew. So going into that community and doing the legwork, establishing yourself as honestly convincing people of what you're trying to do, because they're very wary. They're like, this has happened before, and they feel like, why should they give you their time? Why should, they give you their stories? To what end, In the case of some of these subjects, they would literally directly ask me, how is this going to benefit me and my family? I don't have an answer. I was like, I can't promise you anything. The only thing I can say is that we might gain a better understanding of each other as human beings, and that's good for you and that's good for me. Beyond that, I can't really say. So it's interesting. I'm definitely not like a fly on the wall type of documentarian. Because I'm there. I'm not going to deny the fact that I'm there, that my presence affects the reality of that situation. Yeah.
So you're definitely trying not to be so-called poverty porn. You're not trying to
be
the white savior.
Well, I'm not white, so it's easy. No, I understand.
That's not your audience.
Right. No. I mean, I'm very aware of that. And actually, all of those questions, all of those ethical questions are fascinating. That's where I live generally in my head, navigating that stuff. It's fantastic because it's really directly about us as human beings, what life means, it gets really kind of existential. But, I'm very aware of the fact that work is made like that, like poverty porn, and it's generally ends up being more about the creator of that work than about the subject. So it's such a unique relationship that you have with the person you're photographing. There's no other relationship is like it. Like you can have a conversation with someone, you can fight with someone, you could, but photographing someone is unique. Because it's always this thing about how much that person is willing to reveal, and to you, and by extension to the world, and how much you're able to coax something out of them, and that play, like that back and forth of trying to capture something that's real, that's beyond how we want to present ourselves that's unguarded, trying to get to that, trying to get at that. Because usually I tend to think that, that's kind of the best part of people, which is not to say that, being guarded is bad, because it's hard. But so trying to get at that thing, whether they're, a refugee or an engineer or celebrity or whoever, I think trying to capture something real. And then sometimes it happens and you feel it, like when you're photographing someone, all of a sudden you enter this other space, this other time, where something is happening. There's something beyond words, and you just kind of like, when I feel that happening, I just shoot a lot and I chase it down, because it'll become exhausted, like you'll lose it and that moment will pass, but you will have captured it. So I think that's the thing, like trying to get it to be to something real about anyone, whoever it is, and where they're coming from. This is Tito and Florentine. Florentine is like she's excelling in school. Tito, not so much. He's trying, but he's doing all right. And they live, like I said, in San Diego. Sebazira, talks about how important it is for him to have dinner with his family every day to keep that unity, So it's very important to him.
How old is the father?
He is probably in his mid-30s. Yeah. This is where they live. It's an apartment complex in kind of like southeast San Diego. It's the same at work. His employer loves him because he has such a great work ethic, and he's great. So that's him on the beach. He lists, in his time in the U.S., in his year in the U.S., he lists freedom, democracy, human rights, and equality as new experiences. He makes a point of saying that in the U.S., people are not thrown away or discarded. Rather, here, people are respected and helped, he says. The third family that I'm going to talk about, the subject here, is this gentleman. His name is Shirwani Najibullah, and he is from Afghanistan. So Najibullah is an engineer. He has a master's degree in engineering, and he was working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Afghanistan. And for that reason, the Taliban threatened his life. They said, we're going to come get you and your family. So they had to leave. They had to flee. So they arrived here in November of last year, very recently. This is his boys. Their names are Nabiolu and Mujibullah. This is his wife, Sharif Zoha. And they live in Sacramento. They arrived there, like I said, in November of last year. And they have like so little. It's weird. They have like 5 things, like internet and a car, driver's permit and a part-time job. And to me, I'm like, their life is so precarious. Like they're just, if they lose any of these things, they're back to zero. And it worries me, I'm like, what's going to happen to these little boys? But I feel like almost like I have too much perspective. Like I know too much about their lives and about the U.S., because they don't feel like that at all. To them, it's all gravy. Like they're here, like it's from here on in, it's going to be all right, because they have safety, because it's something that, we take for granted, they're safe. He's building his American life for him and his family. Bit by bit, he's very determined. He's very positive. He's a fantastic person. And he and his wife have a loving, supportive relationship. And I kind of want to make a note about that, because I was surprised about that. And I think that speaks about my preconceived notions of Islam. I don't know. We think that, it's so oppressive towards women, but I saw them. I was with them for like 3 days. And I realized that they communicate a lot. And because everything is new, they're figuring everything out together. They're very supportive of each other, And he's kind of the main point of contact for them, for his family in this world, because he speaks English and they don't. But it was very interesting. It just made me realize, how complex a thing like that is. So they're very happy to be here, very grateful for their family's safety. He's taking English courses, him and his wife. driving, everything is like an adventure. Like going to the store is like getting in the car, putting your hands on the wheel and just kind of, trying to figure out the signage, all of this stuff, all of these things that we take for granted that somebody who comes here brand new has to figure out. And like I said, they have a very great relationship. They have these beautiful children. In fact, they're expecting a little girl. Oh, so here's something a little bit funny. I don't know if you can read, but right there, we went bowling with them because they thought that was an American thing that they wanted to try. So we were happy to facilitate that. We were like, all right, we'll take you bowling. Let's go bowling. So when you put your name into the computer to keep your score, this is the name that he put, and I don't know if you can read it, but it says FNU Najibullah and FNU Mojibullah. And what that means is first name unknown, FNU. And what's happening is that when people from Afghanistan are immigrating to the US, their naming conventions for their names are different. It's like they have a family name and then a personal name and then like a geographical name. So his name is Sherwani Najibullah something, like some place where he's from. Over here, we have like a first name, middle name, last name. So there's some confusion during that process where I think the officials in the offices have taken to writing first name unknown, FNU. And because that's happening, I think that, the families, the individuals have think that it's official. Think that now their name is this, and they've adopted it. So they're adopting it. So there's all these new immigrants from Afghanistan who have this name, which they pronounce FNU. So it's kind of a weird thing, and I tried to explain it to him. I was like, no, this is what that means, and it's just like, I don't know. So we're FNU now. Okay, I'm like, okay. It's funny. So making this work, this New Americans work was such a great experience. One of the things that it made me think about is how much we have here in this country, and in fact, how much we take for granted. We have freedom of worship. There was another family from Iraq that we worked with that lived in Mosul, and ISIS took over Mosul. When that happened, they demanded that everybody who wasn't Muslim, that family in particular, they were Christian, they had to change their religion. They had to become Muslim. And they can't do that. So they had to leave. So now that family is in San Diego, in El Cajon. So freedom of speech, there was a young woman from Eritrea that we worked with who blogged critically about her country's government. So she was threatened. So they said, you can't do that. So she had to leave. Not only that, this woman from Eritrea, her name is Makta. She's highly educated. She went to London to study science, and she's like a microbiologist, her boyfriend as well. But in that country, there is no way to move forward because the economy and the government is so corrupt. It doesn't matter how well educated you are. That's not the way it works. It's not like you get an education and then you work hard and then you move forward. So they had to leave. So, they live in San Diego now. So that's, yes.
Did you get a sense when you were talking with them how much support they had from whatever organization helped bring them over and establishing their new lives?
Yeah, I did, and it varied. Some people were sponsored by an individual or an agency to come here. And once they got here, that was it. Like, there's very little communication. In some cases, there was almost, on the opposite end, there was like daily communication, just kind of checking in, seeing how the kids are doing. But, at that point, it has to end. At some point, it has to end as well. And I think initially they get a stipend. It depends. There's many different agencies. I think at some point they get a stipend, but that ends as well. You have to find a job, all that stuff. Well, that was another thing that was kind of gratifying was learning about all those organizations, Catholic Charities, Jewish Family Services, the International Rescue Committee. There's tons of organizations all over the U.S. helping people resettle. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I thought maybe volunteering to teach people about like how you use like the bus and stuff like that, It was like in the case of the family from Sacramento, I felt like I wanted to tell them stuff, about the U.S. I felt like I wanted to be like, listen, you guys look out for this. And then when this happens, like, take advantage of that. But I couldn't because they're in the place that they are. They had to kind of figure stuff out. and that's how they're going to move forward. So, it's like I'm still dealing with how I'm of service to them, and I have to be detached to a certain extent because it could just overtake my entire like thinking and life and time, everything. So it's weird, you know. It's something that you kind of have to figure out for yourself. I mean, one of the things that was really odd was for the refugees project, there was a big opening, and you know, they invited me to the opening at the Annenberg Space for Photography. I went, it was cool. And then at some point they said, let's go up to the main part of the building because the programming and the presentations are about to begin. And I went up there, and it was so like celebrity, like star stuff. It was such an enormous event. And you know, there was paparazzi everywhere, music, a bar, and we had invited some of these people that I photographed, the refugees, to the event, you know? So I'm like, what are they thinking? You know, I didn't know what I was thinking. I was like, what is happening here? Like this, we're mixing two things that don't seem to really go together. But that's what I mean about how complex our lives are nowadays, you know? Like those things have to coexist. Is it better to not do the work? Is it better that, you know, this work isn't presented at all? I don't think so. You know, is it weird that it's presented in this way that it has to do with Hollywood and entertainment? Yes, but what are the options? I don't know. One of the great things about doing this work, this kind of work, is that you're constantly learning. You're learning about the world, and you're learning about yourself. And this will help both you and the community. So I want to share some of the things that I've learned. One of the things is to be more empathetic. Almost everybody that I've interviewed, and we had a conversation about this, have told me that the only way that we're going to move forward is by helping each other, yeah? To work together so that we can all move forward. Some say that it's the only way. I've also learned to not be discouraged. I've learned that the scope of the problems of these issues that we're talking about are so big. They're very complex. They're beyond like an individual's comprehension, you know? So give it about 35 years, you know, of tireless work, and you'll see some progress. I learned about time. Time is such an important thing. Time when you're making the work, yeah? Time to let that work reveal its meaning to you and to the rest of the world, and time for you to develop as a person. So, you know, slow down if at all possible. Like we're only here for a little tiny bit of time, and it's important that we're conscious when we're here. I learned to be part of the dialogue. Me being here talking to you is that too. You know, I learned to take up space. Yeah? I learned that I want to be part of this ongoing conversation about moving forward, all of us together as a society. Whether we're professionals, amateurs, Instagrammers, or whatever, it seems like photography is the language of our world now, the language of our lives. It's the language we all understand. So I think it should be done consciously. I try to keep this in mind. There's a photographer named Trevor Paglen, who's like a conceptual artist, who poses a question that is, what kind of society is the work that you create helping to shape? What kind of world are you helping to create through the work you make? So I try to keep that in mind. That's all I have. Thank you. Yes, thank you. That's all I have. Thanks, bud. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.